팁, 어떻게 생각하시나요? 나라에 따라 문화적으로 팁이 있는 곳과 없는 곳으로 나뉘어지는데요. 팁 문화가 당연했던 나라들 중에 약간은 다른 시선들이 나타나고 있다고 합니다. 대표적으로 팁 문화가 잘 형성되어 있는 캐나다에서 이와 관련하여 국민들의 여론을 살피는 다큐멘터리를 제작해 방영했다고 하는데요. 팁 문화를 반대하는 한국인들처럼 현대의 팁 문화가 과연 맞는지 안 맞는지, 이 문화에 대해 우리는 어떤 태도를 갖는 게 좋을지에 대한 이야기가 담겨져 있다고 합니다. 팁 문화란 무엇이고 현 시점에서 각국의 사람들의 해석은 어떠한지 해당 다큐멘터리를 통해 살펴보도록 하겠습니다.
There are things in our daily life that are taken for granted and that are kept steadily. I hope one of them is tip culture. It's not an exaggeration to say that Canada is the starting point for such a tip culture. Recently, negative views on tip culture have been prominent among young people. Perhaps the question of why tip culture is so necessary in a fast-changing culture has become the starting point. Let me find out more. Tips are money given voluntarily to the person who provided the service. Tip. In fact, in the 1850s, wealthy people in the U.S. and Canada began to pay a little trouble to restaurant waiters while following the behavior of European aristocrats. This is how it became the custom to tip and become settled. In fact, if you go back to the history of these tip cultures, the custom of tipping them in North America it wasn't positive, as the parents bragged about having money. Ironically, it is not long, and tip culture begins to spread widely around the southern United States. The emancipated slaves of the southern United States were not spared the needy economic situation even after they were freed from slavery, and, in this situation, many business owners even paid cheap wages that didn't allow blacks to choose, in the name of removing a certain amount of their salary from the tips they received from their guests. So black people have had to lean on their tips. When the U.S. economy was in recession, restaurateurs in the northern U.S. also began to encourage tips, rather than the idea that they could take off employees' salaries with tips. Americans and Canadians influenced by such practices are rather exporting tip culture abroad. According to the service industry, it is the custom to pay a certain portion of the rate at. Of course, these tips don't have any advantages either. Due to freely tipping staff according to the satisfaction of the service, employees can expect increased work motivation and additional income. You can expect better service from the guests. The tipped employees become dedicated employees. You can choose a staff you particularly like and ask for it every time you visit. In this process, effective employees are naturally obscured through income imbalance. Recently, negative positions have been prominent on the naturally occurring tip culture. In order to initially resolve various conflict situations that occur at the beginning and in the middle of a tipping culture, I think there's a lot of positions on whether it's not in the direction that we need to get rid of the tip culture, rather than strengthening it. There are, of course, countries without this tip culture. Exactly, Korea. Once in South Korea, it's not about creating regulations or laws on tip culture. We use strategies to protect workers' lives in a way that guarantees them a certain amount of eating and living at the lowest wage. Previously, there was a similar concept called service charge. Tips and differences are not given directly to employees, but to be included in the bill and paid for. This service charge is a VAT exemption in the category that does not exceed 20% of the purchase price. Usually, in a high-end restaurant or in an industry such as a hotel, the VAT and service fees are calculated separately. For example, if you say that food is priced at 10,000 won, you will have 10% service charge and 10% VAT attached to it separately, which will actually pay a total of 12,000 won. In the industry, each 10% is called a tain. In fact, at a restaurant in Korea, it was a big issue when I put out a guide that said I wanted a tip culture. Even though the phrase is not mandated and the guest's choice, the mere presentation of the guide has come under a lot of criticism from Korean netizens. Koreans don't know that not tipping employees will thank employees, but if employees worked well, they would have added more sales to the store, and in the end, the boss would take it for granted to give the employee a bonus. Bonuses are a tip the boss gives to employees in Korea. If you ask if tip culture is illegal in Korea, it is not illegal if there is no coercion. However, this is illegal if the owner of the restaurant is forced to tip or cheated, like the bill does not have a tip charge, making calculations. One culture that should never be brought in from Canada and the United States is tip tip culture, South Koreans say. A position close to 100% of South Koreans are negative towards the tip, and we take for granted the fact that, under our laws, the forcible/compelling act of tipping is illegal. Looking at these tips in Korean culture, I think we need a little more objective perspective on the actively living tip culture in Canada. It seems that the payment for labor, and the service fee for sales above, probably deserved to be received by the employee from the employer. A tip culture that didn't start well in the first place. Perhaps the attitude to maintain that culture is also difficult to positively interpret in social terms. Socially, it's about making employers feel responsible and able to pay what they deserve for the people who work. I would rather not be one of the reasons why at this point we need to eradicate tip culture. In addition, anyone between employees receives tips, nobody receives tips, and immediate feedback within the working space. Rather than raising the morale of the employees, but being able to be demoralized and working hard enough to be tipped, than doing it. In the first place, I think you can maintain the amount of work attitude you receive from your employer. As the years have passed, I hope to be our Canada, which corrects and develops better in socio-economic terms and in cultural terms.
해외 각국의 반응 살펴보도록 하겠습니다.
팁, 받으면 좋지. 그런데 주는 입장에서는 늘 고민이 되기도 해. 주면서 약간 민망할 때도 있고, 뭔가 줄만한 상황이 아니어서 안 주는 건데도 민망할 때도 있고 말이야. 오히려 난 한국에서 갖고 있는 팁에 대한 태도가 더 좋다고 봐. 그렇게 해야 일을 하는 사람들의 동기가 일시적이 아닌 장기적으로 더 올라갈 것 같거든.
솔직히 캐나다 내에서 팁 문화는 울며 겨자 먹기지. 그냥 문화니까 하는 거야. 저 사람들이 급여가 적다는 걸 알고 팁을 줘야만 어느 정도 채워진다는 걸 아니까. 그 눈빛을 보면 진짜 좀 마음이 그래. 이제는 국가적 차원에서 분명한 제도를 마련해서 괜한 서민들의 주머니를 축내지 않았으면 좋겠어. 배울 점은 좀 배우자.
역시 한국은 한국이다. 한국 사람들은 전 세계 어디에서 만나도 참 나이스하던데 한국이라는 나라는 정말 나이스 강국이었구나 싶네. 팁 문화는 확실하게 별로야. 그런 부분에 대해 관습이고 문화라는 이유로 정당화시키면서 유지하려고 한다는 게 참 후진국스러운 태도지. 이제는 우리도 한국처럼 나이스 강국이 돼보자고. 팁 문화. 이제 그만 좀 하자.
세상을 보는 눈, 모두가 자연스럽게 당연스럽게 하는 일들에 대해서는 한 번쯤 멈춰서 왜? 라는 질문을 던져보는 것도 필요한 것 같습니다. 오늘도 개인의 자리에서 더 나은 세상으로 한 걸음 나아갈 수 있는 하루 되시길 바랍니다. 구독과 좋아요는 저희 채널에 큰 힘이 됩니다. 감사합니다.